In a display of regional solidarity, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the transitional president of Burkina Faso, hosted a high-level summit with his counterparts from the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, Colonel Assimi Goïta of Mali and General Abdourahamane Tchiani of Niger. The meeting, held at the presidential palace in Ouagadougou, focused on evaluating the Confederation's achievements since its formal establishment and outlining ambitious plans for future development amid ongoing challenges in security, economic independence, and integration. The AES, also known as the Confederation of Sahel States, CES, traces its roots to a mutual defense pact signed on September 16, 2023, in response to external pressures following coups in the member states. This pact evolved into a full confederation on July 6, 2024, during the inaugural summit in Niamey, Niger, where leaders signed a treaty emphasizing collective defense, economic cooperation, and a rejection of neo-colonial influences. The three nations, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, collectively span over 2.7 million square kilometers and house more than 71 million people, forming a bloc united by shared histories of military transitions and a determination to assert sovereignty. Since its inception, the AES has notched several key achievements that underscore its push towards self-reliance. On the security front, the alliance announced a joint military force of 5,000 personnel in January 2025, aimed at combating Islamist insurgencies that have plagued the region for years. This force has facilitated coordinated operations, enhancing cross-border intelligence sharing and reducing reliance on foreign troops. In June 2025, the establishment of a regional criminal court further bolstered these efforts, providing a framework to prosecute terrorism and human rights violations within the Confederation. Leaders at the summit highlighted how these measures have contributed to stabilizing volatile areas, with Traoré noting in his opening remarks that our united front against terror is not just a pact on paper but a shield forged in the fires of our shared struggles. Economically, the AES has made strides in decoupling from Western-dominated systems. Proposals for a common central bank and a new currency to replace the CFA franc, long criticized as a remnant of colonial control, have advanced significantly. In May 2025, energy policies were harmonized to prioritize renewable sources, while export controls on grains to non-AES ECOWAS countries were implemented to safeguard food security. The creation of the Confederal Bank for Investment and Development, CBID, in the same month has funneled resources into infrastructure projects, including joint agriculture and energy initiatives designed to foster self-sufficiency. Resource management has also seen bold reforms. Mining contracts with Western and Chinese firms have been renegotiated, leading to nationalizations in 2025 that increased government stakes in lithium, uranium, and gold sectors. The launch of the Alliance of Agricultural Seed Producers of the Sahel, APSA-Sahel, in July 2025 aims to boost local seed production, reducing dependence on imports and enhancing food sovereignty. Cultural and administrative integration has progressed rapidly, symbolizing the alliance's commitment to unity. A common flag was unveiled on February 22, 2025, followed by an official anthem in May. Roaming charges for telecommunications were abolished, easing communication across borders, and a joint biometric passport was introduced on January 29, 2025, facilitating freer movement among citizens. The first Alliance of Sahel States Games, held in Mali from June 21 to 28, 2025, brought together athletes from the three nations, promoting cultural exchange and solidarity. A common cultural policy, signed in February 2025, further cements these ties. In foreign relations, the AES has pivoted eastward, severing military ties with Western powers in 2024 and engaging Russian mercenaries, including the Wagner Group, for security support. Nuclear cooperation agreements with Russia for peaceful atomic energy were signed in June 2025, signaling a diversification of partnerships. The bloc's withdrawal from the Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie in March 2025 and diplomatic breaks with Ukraine underscore this shift toward multipolar alignments. Discussions at the Ouagadougou Summit delved into future trajectories, with leaders emphasizing the need for deeper integration. Plans for a monetary union and common market remain central, including the rollout of a unified currency to fully escape the CFA franc's grip. A joint parliament is on the horizon, with Burkina Faso set to host the inaugural parliamentary summit later this year. Judicial advancements include locating the regional criminal court and building a high-security prison to international standards. A 0.5% common customs duty on imports from outside the AES is slated for March 2025 implementation, alongside a unified road safety strategy. The summit also explored federalization into a single sovereign entity, with investments targeted at industrialization, agriculture, mining, and energy. Expansion prospects were broached, as Chad and Togo have expressed interest in joining, potentially broadening the alliance's influence. Traoré, in a passionate address, reiterated the AES's role in challenging imperialist forces, echoing sentiments from earlier speeches where he described the alliance as a direct challenge to Western domination. As the leaders engaged in closed-door sessions, topics ranged from enhancing the joint military's capabilities to accelerating economic reforms. Goïta emphasized the importance of the recent seed alliance for long-term food security, while Tchiani highlighted gains in mining sovereignty. Observers note that these developments come amid broader regional shifts, including the AES's complete withdrawal from ECOWAS in January 2025 and ongoing tensions with Western mining interests. With security threats persisting and economic pressures mounting, the discussions underscored the bloc's resilience. As the second day of the summit unfolded under a sweltering Sahelian sun, the air in Ouagadougou buzzed not just with diplomatic deliberations but with echoes of widespread public jubilation across Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Citizens of the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, have increasingly voiced their elation at the prospect of their nations merging efforts toward a singular, transformative goal, reclaiming full sovereignty and fostering a united, self-reliant Africa free from external domination. This sentiment, rooted in decades of post-colonial struggles, has manifested in vibrant street celebrations, viral campaigns, and grassroots movements that paint the AES as a beacon of Pan-African hope. In the streets of Bamako, Niamey, and Ouagadougou, spontaneous rallies have drawn thousands since the Confederation's formalization in 2024, with participants waving the newly adopted AES flag, a symbol of unity unveiled in February 2025 that features intertwined colors representing the shared heritage and aspirations of the three nations. Chants of "One Sahel, One People" reverberate through markets and public squares, echoing the lyrics of the official AES anthem, Sahel Ben Kan, launched in June 2025, which calls for breaking the chains of imperialism and building a prosperous future together. Local artists and musicians have amplified this joy, composing songs and murals that depict the AES as a new dawn for Africa, drawing inspiration from historical figures like Thomas Sankara and Kwame Nkrumah, whose visions of continental unity resonate deeply in the current context. Public happiness stems largely from the perceived end to fragmentation imposed by colonial legacies and neo-colonial influences. Many citizens express relief at the AES's withdrawal from ECOWAS in January 2025, viewing it as a bold rejection of organizations seen as puppets of Western powers. In interviews with residents in rural Burkina Faso, farmers like Amina Diallo from the village of Dori shared, "For years, we've been divided by borders drawn by outsiders. Now, with the AES, we feel like family again, sharing resources, fighting jihadists together, and building our own economy. It's like waking from a long nightmare." This sense of familial reconnection is particularly poignant among the youth, who comprise over 60% of the population in these countries and have been at the forefront of pro-AES demonstrations. The introduction of a joint biometric passport in January 2025 has made cross-border travel seamless, fostering a tangible sense of oneness. In Burkina Faso, artists have shared illustrations of a unified Sahel map spanning 2.7 million square kilometers, emphasizing how this merger could create Africa's largest nation by landmass, rich in gold, uranium, and lithium. Resources now being nationalized to benefit locals rather than foreign corporations. The economic promises of the AES have fueled much of this public euphoria. Proposals for a common currency to replace the CFA franc, discussed extensively at the summit, are hailed as a liberation from monetary control by France. Traders and markets across the region anticipate lower transaction costs and boosted intra-AES trade, with initiatives like the Confederal Bank for Investment and Development, CBID, already funding joint agricultural projects that promise food security. A survey conducted by local NGOs in mid-2025 revealed that 78% of respondents in urban centers believe the alliance will improve livelihoods, citing the harmonization of energy policies and the creation of the Alliance of Agricultural Seed Producers of the Sahel, APSA-Sahel, as game changers for smallholder farmers facing climate challenges. Security gains have further deepened public support. as the joint 5,000-strong military force established in January 2025 has led to perceived reductions in terrorist incursions. Mothers in displaced persons camps in northern Mali speak of renewed hope, with one woman, Fatoumata Keita, stating, "Our children can dream of peace now because our leaders are fighting as one, not begging for foreign help that never comes." This unity extends to cultural realms, where the first AES Games in June 2025 brought athletes together, sparking national pride and stories of camaraderie that transcend old rivalries. Diaspora communities abroad have echoed this joy, organizing solidarity events in Europe and North America to rally behind the AES's anti-imperialist stance. Expatriates from Niger and Paris have formed support groups, fundraising for development projects and sharing videos of summit highlights, framing the merger as a fulfillment of Pan-African dreams long deferred. Historians note that this wave of happiness draws from the spirit of the 1960s independence movements, but with a modern twist, leveraging technology and youth activism to sustain momentum. Yet, as leaders like Traoré, Goïta, and Tchiani huddled in working groups on energy and infrastructure, whispers of expansion added layers to the public's optimism. Interest from Chad and Togo in joining the AES has sparked discussions of a broader Sahelian bloc, potentially inspiring similar mergers elsewhere on the continent. In cafes and forums, citizens debate how this could evolve into a federation, with shared parliaments and economies driving unprecedented growth. The summit's atmosphere reflects this grassroots energy, with delegates pausing to acknowledge messages of support flooding in from across the region. As the summit stretched into its third day on August 11, 2025, amid heightened anticipation in Ouagadougou, discussions among AES leaders, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, Colonel Assimi Goïta, and General Abdourahamane Tchiani, shifted toward the tantalizing prospect of expansion. Whispers of interest from neighboring nations like Chad and Togo, already flagged during earlier sessions, evolved into substantive deliberations on how their potential accession could reshape the alliance. Beyond these, exploratory signals from Benin and Ghana have surfaced in regional diplomatic circles, hinting at a broader realignment that could draw in more Sahelian and West African states disillusioned with traditional blocs like ECOWAS. These overtures, fueled by shared frustrations over economic exploitation and security vacuums, underscore a growing momentum for the AES as a magnet for sovereign-minded governments across the continent. If Chad were to join, the benefits would be profound and multifaceted, injecting new vitality into the Confederation's strategic depth. As a landlocked nation bordering 6 countries, including Libya and Sudan, Chad's inclusion would extend the AES's geographical footprint northward and eastward, creating a contiguous bloc spanning from the Atlantic fringes to the edges of the Sahara. This expansion would amplify military capabilities, with Chad's battle-hardened forces, experienced in countering Boko Haram and other trans-Saharan threats, bolstering the existing 5,000-strong joint AES military. Coordinated operations could then encompass a wider theater, from the Lake Chad Basin to the Liptako-Gourma region, potentially curbing jihadist mobility across porous borders that have long evaded singular national efforts. Economically, Chad's vast oil reserves and untapped mineral wealth, including uranium and gold, would synergize with Niger's uranium dominance and Burkina Faso's gold production, forming a resource powerhouse capable of negotiating better terms on the global stage. Leaders envision pooled extraction technologies and shared refineries, reducing extraction costs by up to 20% through economies of scale and minimizing reliance on foreign multinationals that have historically siphoned profits abroad. Togo's potential entry, as a coastal nation with the deep water port of Lomé, would address one of the AES's most pressing vulnerabilities: landlocked isolation. Currently, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger depend on external ports in ECOWAS countries for 80% of their imports, often at inflated fees and amid political tensions. Togo's accession could provide a dedicated maritime gateway, slashing logistics costs and transit times for goods like cotton, phosphates, and livestock exports. This integration would foster infrastructure megaprojects, such as extending the AES's planned high-speed rail network from Niamey to Lomé, facilitating seamless movement of people and commodities. On the security front, Togo's stable military could contribute to joint maritime patrols in the Gulf of Guinea, combating piracy that disrupts regional trade valued at billions annually. Culturally, Togo's diverse ethnic tapestry, including Yu and Kabai groups with ties to Burkina Faso's Mossi, would enrich the AES's push for a common identity, perhaps accelerating the adoption of shared educational curricula that emphasize African history and languages over colonial-era frameworks. Should Benin and Ghana express formal interest and join, driven by their own grievances over unequal trade deals and border disputes, the ripple effects would cascade further. Benin's cotton-rich economy could align with the AES's agricultural initiatives, like APSA-Sahel, to create a continental seed bank resistant to climate variability, potentially increasing yields by 30% across semi-arid zones. Ghana, with its robust cocoa and oil sectors, would add industrial heft, enabling the bloc to process raw materials locally rather than exporting them cheaply. Imagine a unified AES market where Ghanaian refineries transform Nigerian crude into fuels distributed tariff-free to Burkinabe farms, or Beninese textiles woven from Malian cotton finding ready buyers in Niame's markets. These synergies would not only diversify revenue streams but also insulate the alliance from global commodity price shocks, as intra-bloc trade could rise from its current nascent levels to rival the European Union's internal exchanges. The broader implications for African unity and strength lie in this expansion's potential to ignite a domino effect, drawing in more nations and challenging the fragmented post-colonial order. If Chad, Togo, Benin, and Ghana accede, the AES could encompass over 100 million people and vast swathes of territory, positioning it as a counterweight to lingering neo-colonial influences from Europe and emerging powers like China. This enlarged entity would embody the Pan-African ideals espoused by luminaries like Kwame Nkrumah, who dreamed of a United States of Africa to harness collective bargaining power. Militarily, a beefed-up joint force, potentially swelling to 20,000 troops with new members, could deploy rapid response units across hotspots from the Sahel to the Horn, deterring external interventions and fostering homegrown peacekeeping. Diplomatically, the bloc's amplified voice in forums like the African Union could push for reforms, such as debt relief tailored to resource-rich but impoverished states, or vetoing exploitative trade pacts that favor multinationals over local industries. Economically, the strength derived from unity would manifest in a fortified common market, where barriers to trade, customs duties, non-tariff restrictions, and currency mismatches dissolve. With a shared currency on the horizon, transactions would bypass the volatility of the CFA franc or naira, stabilizing inflation and encouraging investment in cross-border ventures like solar farms spanning Mali's deserts to power Togo's ports. If a majority of African countries were to follow suit, say, 30 or more nations encompassing East African Community members or Southern African Development Community states, the trade benefits would be exponential. Intra-African trade, currently languishing at 18% of the continent's total commerce compared to Asia's 60%, could surge to 50% within a decade, unlocking $1 trillion in annual economic activity through diversified supply chains. For instance, AES members could export surplus grains to drought-hit regions in the Horn, while importing Ethiopian coffee or South African machinery without punitive tariffs, creating jobs in logistics, manufacturing, and agribusiness. This pan-continental merger would also enhance resilience against climate shocks, with pooled funds from expanded Confederal Bank for investment and development financing megadams on the Niger River or reforestation projects across the Sahel Green Wall Initiative. Socially, freer movement via extended biometric passports could spur labor mobility, allowing skilled workers from Ghana to fill engineering gaps in Chad's oil fields, or Malian artisans to market crafts in Beninese hubs. The cultural dividends would deepen, with joint festivals celebrating shared heritage, from Tuareg music festivals to Akan storytelling traditions, fostering a sense of African citizenship that transcends artificial borders drawn at the Berlin Conference. Yet, as delegates pored over maps and projections in Ouagadougou's conference halls, the conversations revealed layers of complexity. Integrating diverse economies demands harmonizing regulations, from labor laws to environmental standards, while addressing potential inequalities where wealthier joiners like Ghana might dominate decision-making. Security alignments would require navigating alliances with external partners, ensuring Russian support doesn't alienate potential members wary of new dependencies. Trade benefits, while promising, hinge on infrastructure upgrades, roads, rails, and digital networks that could strain budgets unless financed through innovative mechanisms like resource-backed bonds. Expansion whispers have also stirred debates on governance, with some advocating for a federal constitution to prevent power imbalances, while others push for loose confederation to preserve national autonomies. The summit's energy, buoyed by these visions, spilled into side meetings where experts modeled scenarios of a 10-nation AES by 2030, projecting GDP growth rates doubling to 7% annually through integrated value chains in minerals and agriculture. As the summit's deliberations extended into the late afternoon of August 11, 2025, the focus intensified on the accelerated economic development that could surge across the continent if African nations fully embraced the principle of Africa for Africans. A core tenet of the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, that envisions a mighty, self-determined Africa commanding its vast resources from extraction to global partnerships. Leaders Captain Ibrahim Traoré, Colonel Assimi Goïta, and General Abdourahamane Tchiani, in impassioned roundtable sessions, articulated how this unity could catalyze growth rates unseen since the post-independence era, transforming the Sahel and beyond into an economic powerhouse by wresting control from foreign entities that have long dictated terms in mining, agriculture, and energy sectors. At the heart of the AES's objective lies the reclamation of resource sovereignty, where production shifts from exploitative foreign concessions to locally driven operations that prioritize African labor, technology transfer, and value addition. In Burkina Faso's gold mines, for instance, recent nationalizations have already increased state revenues by 25% in the first half of 2025, allowing reinvestment into smelting facilities that process ore domestically rather than shipping it raw to Europe or Asia. Extending this model continent-wide, as Traoré emphasized in a keynote segment, would mean African engineers and firms leading uranium production in Niger, home to 7% of global reserves, ensuring that refinement and nuclear fuel fabrication occur on African soil, potentially generating billions in added value and creating skilled jobs for millions of youth entering the workforce annually. Mali's cotton fields, often dubbed white gold, could similarly evolve under unified policies, with cooperative processing mills turning fiber into textiles for intra-African markets, reducing the 90% export of raw cotton that currently benefits foreign manufacturers while leaving farmers in poverty. Distribution networks, long fragmented by colonial-era infrastructure favoring export to former metropoles, stand to be revolutionized through AES-inspired integration. The Confederation's push for a common market, as outlined in working documents, envisions tariff-free corridors linking landlocked Sahelian states to coastal outlets, slashing transportation costs by 40% and enabling efficient flow of goods like lithium from Zimbabwe, vital for electric batteries, to processing hubs in the AES bloc. If expanded to include nations like Chad with its oil pipelines or Togo's ports, this could form a spine of high-speed rail and digital logistics platforms, powered by renewable energy from harmonized solar grids across the Sahara. Such systems would not only speed up distribution but also empower African distributors to set prices, bypassing middlemen in Paris or Beijing who skim profits. Goïta, drawing from Mali's experiences, highlighted how controlling distribution could stabilize food supplies, with joint granaries and seed banks under the Alliance of Agricultural Seed Producers of the Sahel, APSA-Sahel, ensuring surplus grains from fertile zones reach drought-prone areas without speculative hikes imposed by international cartels. Partnerships, the third pillar of resource control, represent a paradigm shift from asymmetrical deals to equitable alliances that serve African interests first. The AES's eastward pivot, including nuclear cooperation with Russia signed in June 2025, exemplifies this. Instead of one-sided extraction contracts, agreements now mandate technology sharing and joint ventures, where African states hold majority stakes, up to 51% in new uranium deals, ensuring profits fund local development like schools and hospitals rather than offshore accounts. Tchiani underscored Niger's renegotiations with Chinese firms, which have yielded infrastructure swaps for mineral rights, but with clauses for environmental safeguards and workforce training, preventing the debt traps that have ensnared other nations. Scaling this to a Pan-African level, leaders brainstormed a continental resource charter, inspired by the AES Treaty, that would bar partnerships lacking transparency or local content requirements, potentially attracting ethical investors from the global south while deterring predatory ones. This could unlock $2 trillion in untapped mineral wealth across Africa, from Congo's cobalt to South Africa's platinum, funneled through institutions like the Confederal Bank for Investment and Development, CBID, to finance megaprojects such as desalination plants for arid regions or biotech hubs for indigenous medicine. The faster economic development envisioned stems from compounding effects of this control. Higher GDP growth through retained revenues, estimated at 5 to 7% annually for AES members alone by independent projections, could balloon to double digits with broader unity, as resources fuel industrialization rather than raw export. In agriculture, owning production means breeding climate-resilient seeds tailored to African soils, boosting yields by 50% and cutting import bills for staples like wheat, while distribution reforms create regional value chains where Kenyan tea blends with Ivorian cocoa for branded products sold globally under African labels. Partnerships would evolve into South-South collaborations, like bartering Nigerian oil for Ethiopian hydropower expertise, fostering innovation ecosystems where African universities patent technologies for resource extraction, from drone-based mining surveys to blockchain-tracked supply chains that ensure ethical sourcing. This mighty Africa, as the leaders phrased it, would not merely grow wealth but redistribute it equitably, addressing inequalities that have fueled unrest. Resource revenues could capitalize sovereign wealth funds modeled on Norway's but adapted for Africa, investing in human capital, education in STEM fields to produce the next generation of resource managers, and social safety nets that lift informal workers in artisanal mining into formalized sectors. The AES's monetary union, with a currency backed by gold and uranium reserves, would shield against currency devaluations engineered by external forces, stabilizing inflation and enabling long-term planning for infrastructure like trans-African highways that connect Cape Town to Cairo, facilitating trade volumes projected to quadruple intercontinentally. Delegates delved into sector-specific blueprints, from energy where solar and wind farms could export power to Europe on African terms, reversing colonial energy flows, to pharmaceuticals where controlling herbal resources leads to patented medicines combating diseases like malaria. Challenges surfaced in these talks: harmonizing regulations across diverse economies, building capacity to negotiate as equals, and countering sabotage from vested interests. But the overriding narrative painted a trajectory where Africa's 30% of global minerals and 60% of arable land translate into geopolitical clout, with the AES as the vanguard sparking similar blocs in East and Southern Africa. As evening fell, breakout groups refined proposals for a Pan-African resource summit, inviting observers from across the continent to explore how this model could propagate, ensuring that development accelerates not just in growth metrics but in tangible improvements to daily lives. The vision of a mighty Africa, united under the banner of Africa for Africans, took sharper focus. Leaders Captain Ibrahim Traoré, Colonel Assimi Goïta, and General Abdourahamane Tchiani, joined by advisors and technocrats, dove into granular strategies to translate resource sovereignty into a continental renaissance. The AES's ambition to control production, distribution, and partnerships, as discussed in earlier sessions, crystallized into actionable commitments, with a potential expansion to include Chad, Togo, Benin, and Ghana amplifying the stakes. The room hummed with a sense of historic purpose, as delegates envisioned an Africa that not only harnesses its 30% of global mineral wealth and 60% of arable land, but also dictates terms in global markets, reshaping a narrative of dependency into one of dominance. The discussions zeroed in on operationalizing this vision. In production, the AES leaders proposed a continental resource mapping initiative, leveraging satellite technology and African-led geological surveys to catalog untapped reserves, from rare earths in the Congo Basin to offshore gas in Mozambique. This would empower the AES, and a future expanded bloc, to prioritize extraction based on local needs, such as lithium for renewable energy storage over exports to foreign tech giants. Traoré highlighted Burkina Faso's recent success in redirecting gold profits to build 200 rural schools in 2025, a model that could scale to fund technical institutes across the Sahel, training youth to operate smelters and biorefineries. Mali's push to establish textile factories, processing its 800,000 tons of annual cotton production into garments, was cited as a blueprint for adding value before export, potentially increasing export revenues by 35% and creating 100,000 jobs per country if replicated across an enlarged AES. Distribution strategies took center stage, with plans to integrate logistics networks through a proposed African Trade Corridor Authority. This body would oversee the construction of trans-Sahelian highways and rail lines, linking Niamey's markets to Lomé's ports and extending to potential new members like Benin, where the port of Cotonou could handle bulk shipments of Nigerian uranium or Chadian oil. Such infrastructure, funded by the Confederal Bank for Investment and Development, CBID, could cut intra-African shipping costs by half, enabling smallholder farmers in Mali to supply Ghanaian markets with millet or Burkina Faso's shea butter to reach East African consumers without exorbitant tariffs. Goïta stressed the urgency of digital integration, proposing a unified e-commerce platform to streamline trade, allowing artisans in Bamako to sell directly to buyers in Accra, bypassing foreign intermediaries who inflate costs. Partnerships, the linchpin of this economic overhaul, saw bold pledges to rewrite the rules of engagement. The AES's experience with Russia, securing nuclear technology transfers while retaining majority stakes in joint ventures, served as a template for future deals. Tchiani outlined a vision for an African resource partnership framework, requiring foreign investors to establish local R&D centers and employ at least 70% African staff in managerial roles. This would ensure that partnerships with emerging powers like India or Brazil prioritize technology transfer over resource extraction, fostering industries like solar panel manufacturing in the Sahel or vaccine production in Ghana. Such measures could retain up to 80% of resource profits within Africa, compared to the current 20% under foreign-dominated contracts, channeling funds into universal healthcare systems or climate-resilient irrigation networks. The prospect of a broader AES, potentially encompassing 10 or more nations by 2030, ignited discussions on how this could unify the continent. Delegates modeled a scenario where a 30-nation bloc, spanning from Senegal to Ethiopia, could pool resources to rival global economic powers. This united Africa would leverage its collective GDP, projected to hit $5 trillion by 2035 with unified policies, to negotiate as equals in WTO forums, securing exemptions from trade rules that penalize raw material exporters. Security-wise, an expanded joint force could stabilize regions like the Horn of Africa, integrating Somalia's or Sudan's militaries to curb piracy and smuggling, ensuring safe trade routes. Culturally, a Pan-African university network, proposed during the summit, would standardize curricula to teach resource management and indigenous knowledge, fostering a generation that sees itself as African first, not bound by colonial borders. Trade benefits for a majority African AES were quantified in real time by economic advisors. Intra-African trade, currently at 18%, could soar to 60% by 2035, mirroring Asia's integration, with $1.5 trillion in annual trade flows driven by tariff-free zones. For instance, Nigerian petrochemicals could power Malian factories, while Ethiopian hydropower lights up Togo's ports, creating a circular economy where each nation's strengths, Kenya's tech innovation, South Africa's industrial base, complement others. This would reduce Africa's $100 billion annual import bill for processed goods, redirecting savings to infrastructure like 5G networks or desalination plants to combat Sahelian droughts. The summit also explored a Pan-African stock exchange, headquartered in an AES capital, to list resource-backed securities, attracting diaspora investments and countering capital flight estimated at $50 billion yearly. Public enthusiasm continued to swell outside the conference halls. In Ouagadougou's Place de la Nation, thousands gathered, waving AES flags and chanting for a united Africa. Farmers from Mali's Sikasso region shared stories of increased yields from APSA-Sahel seeds, while Nigerian traders celebrated the biometric passport's ease of cross-border commerce. Across the Sahel, community radio stations broadcast summit updates, with callers from Chad and Togo expressing eagerness to join, seeing the AES as a bulwark against foreign exploitation. Diaspora groups in Lagos and Addis Ababa organized parallel forums, pledging remittances to support CBID projects, envisioning a future where African children learn in classrooms funded by African gold, not foreign aid. As evening approached, the leaders unveiled a draft Ouagadougou declaration, committing to fast-track monetary union by 2027, establish a resource sovereignty task force, and invite observer delegations from interested nations for a follow-up summit in Bamako next year. The declaration reaffirmed the AES's goal, an Africa that controls its destiny, where resources fuel prosperity for its 1.4 billion people, not distant capitals. Challenges, logistical bottlenecks, governance harmonization, and external pushback were acknowledged, but the mood was defiant. Traoré's closing remarks captured the spirit. Our ancestors dreamed of this moment. We are not just building an alliance. We are forging a continent that stands tall, united, and unbreakable. The summit adjourned with delegates departing to their capitals, carrying blueprints for a transformed Africa. In the streets, celebrations continued, with fireworks lighting up the Ouagadougou sky, a vivid symbol of a continent awakening to its potential. The path ahead remains arduous, but the AES's strides have ignited a flame of possibility, one that could illuminate the entire continent if the momentum holds.